This week, we will focus on a new aspect of energy services, that is, on the affordability of energy services. According to the United Nations, more than 780 million people live below the international poverty line of $1.90 per day. More than 11% of the world population is living in extreme poverty and struggling to fulfill the most basic needs like food, health, education, and access to water, sanitation, and energy. Ending poverty in all its forms everywhere is the first and foremost of the 17 goals on the UN Agenda for Sustainable Development. High poverty rates are especially prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia, as well as in fragile states and conflict-affected countries. You may see the international poverty line as a global absolute minimum. However, if all world citizens had to make do with $1.90 per day, nobody would feel poor. Poverty is a relative concept, reflecting the fact that not all world citizens are equally poor or equally wealthy. Poverty relates to wealth and income inequality between nations, and within nations between different population groups. That is why many countries have defined country-specific poverty thresholds, which relate to the standard of living of the majority of the population, the standard that is generally seen as normal in that country. For example, poverty may be related to a household's disposable income and may be expressed as a percentage of the national median equivalized disposable income per household. That is quite complicated. How to define a meaningful poverty line is food for thought, especially for economists and statisticians. The point is that poverty is a real problem in developing as well as developed nations, especially as income and wealth inequality are increasing in many countries. But now, let's focus on energy poverty. The absolute energy poverty line defines that a person is living in energy poverty if he or she cannot afford or does not have access to a minimum of 120 kilowatt hours per year of electricity services and a minimum of clean fuels for cooking to the equivalent of 35 kilos of liquefied petroleum gas per year. However, like poverty, energy poverty is a relative concept that is defined differently in different countries. The first country to define energy poverty was the United Kingdom, which defined it as fuel poverty sometime in the 1970s. A household is considered fuel poor if it has to spend more than 10% of the disposable household income on keeping its home adequately warm during the winter, on cold days. Adequately warm is usually defined as a temperature of 21 degrees centigrade in the living area and 18 degrees in other rooms. From this example, you can deduce three important factors which are important for fuel poverty. It's household income, fuel prices, and housing quality, especially with respect to energy efficiency. If a household occupies a dwelling with little thermal insulation, with drafty windows, leaking roofs and damp walls, the costs of adequate heating will obviously be much higher than in the case of a modern, well-insulated and well-maintained home. The same goes for old and inefficient heating systems. Fuel poverty and the more general concept of energy poverty relates through household income with poverty. The modern definition of fuel poverty evidently includes electricity, the share of which in the household energy bill is increasing with the ongoing electrification of modern households. For people living in poverty, investing in home improvements and in more energy-efficient heating systems is generally impossible, even with substantial financial support. Meanwhile, more affluent people can significantly improve the energy efficiency of their households by investing in better thermal insulation and by investing in more energy-efficient heating systems and electrical devices. They can even go much further in reducing their electricity and fuel bills by installing PV solar roof panels, by installing storage systems for heat and cold, or by buying electric cars. We should realize that the government incentive schemes designed to stimulate a greener, climate-friendly energy system may have a significant distributional effect in terms of income transfer from all taxpayers to a relatively privileged segment of the population. Such stimulation measures are justified to the extent that they help to accelerate technological innovation, to establish new industries, to create new jobs, and last but not least, to bring down the costs of green energy technologies sooner, so that these new technologies become sooner affordable for the population at large. However, if the extent of income transfer is not tailored to limits of social acceptability, governments are at risk to erode public support for their energy policy. You may argue that energy poverty should also include transport fuels, especially in regions where public transport is largely lacking and where people cannot reach shops, medical and other social services without a car. After all, transport fuels are another kind of energy service. In most countries, however, this particular aspect of energy poverty is known as transport poverty and handled as a transport policy theme. As you have now understood, affordability of energy services is not something we can capture in a single indicator. Energy poverty can be manifest in different ways, as it involves different causes. In this week's lectures, you will be introduced into the metrics of affordability of energy services and energy poverty. What indicators have been developed to measure affordability, and what do the different metrics tell you? How can government intervene to reduce energy poverty? We briefly mentioned incentive schemes for green energy technologies and energy efficiency improvements. Governments have many more options to intervene. For example, in setting quality standards for the energy efficiency of dwellings and offices, and in deciding on the tariff systems that apply to electricity and fuel services. I hope this week's video will inspire you to give the subject of energy poverty much deeper thought and to come up with new solutions. Thank you for watching.